Hey, how's it going? Professor Reed here. Wanted to record a video. I went through my archives, found some really good papers that had some solid paragraphs to really break down the different types of paragraphs for this essay. And as we said in the other lectures and the YouTube videos, the goal of the essay is to take something, a topic, and expand on it and really look at these three different source types. Now, what I did was I used a video that was made by Katie I used a PowerPoint, turned it into the video, made by Katie at Penn State. She's a librarian there. Super amazing job with this. So I want to just go over a little bit of a background information about, the different types of sources and then look at some examples of the paragraphs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post these examples, the full essays, up on Canvas, and then I'm also going to use this lecture to sort of break down what I think is good about the actual paragraphs. Okay. All right, good. So now remember, as we discussed in the previous types of discussions about the essay, we're using forensic sources, which are going to be sources mainly focused on the past, deliberative sources, which are going to be sources about the future, or ones that make recommendations, and then epideictic sources. And as we said, this came from Aristotle. He was a pretty famous, well-known philosopher, and in his book on rhetoric, he sort of breaks down these different types of rhetoric. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to analyze the source material, trying to make an argumentative essay based upon what the source material is saying. And we're trying to look at the sources from almost like the past, present, and future to give it a chronological timeline for it. Okay, and remember, each one of these genres of rhetoric, as Aristotle said, has a different concern. Forensic sources is usually trying to establish past events, establishing more factual information. Epideictic is going to be usually the ones that are a little bit more popular-based source material. Now remember, like memes and also blogs can be a really good examples of those. And then deliberative sources are going to try to advise and warn, and they're typically about a next state of action. So each one of these modes of rhetoric are going to be, set up a way to achieve a very specific goal. And you're looking at the range of source material. Okay, and the sources can come from books, scholarly articles, memes, which I have a proclivity to like some of the memes out there, analyzing how a meme functions. In fact, I think it's sort of a good symbol for understanding religion, all sorts of things out there. Websites, social media, and forum posts are really good. So if you can find like a Twitter page or even a YouTube page that has a comment section to it, you could use that. And in the specific examples that librarians made, government documents, especially in a paper that gravitates towards a little bit of conspiracy. The example we look at is JFK, but obviously a ton of government types of documents are there. And searching strategies, as I say in class, I would say your best searching strategy is to start off with the Wikipedia page, maybe look up the Wikipedia page, but all the while keeping in mind that you don't really want to use the Wikipedia page as a verifiable source because it can be changed, it can be altered. And to be fair to Wikipedia, they've made a ton of changes over the years that is trying to improve their image. They've also tried to, really manage who can control, like who has access to the material. Basically, a little bit older, just turned 50. One of the things I can remember was the actual encyclopedias. Huge day at my house when I got the encyclopedia. However, now we have everything on Wikipedia. What I would do is I would start off and look at the Wikipedia page and use it as a baseline point of discussion. In addition, don't forget at the bottom of the Wikipedia page, ton of articles that you can use there as well. So a lot of direction that you can follow for any of these types of papers. Okay, and then forensic sources, remember, they're gonna focus on authority, talking about the past. They're also going to be very methodical. They're going to have citations, and a lot of times the forensic sources are going to be potentially primary source material as well. Now, the ideal goal of the essay is to break down, make an argument, discuss how the source material represents the information. And one of the things you can turn to is Google Scholar or a library database. Now, I know this lecture is for multiple places, but because I'm using the one from Penn State, it has the amazing Penn State database, the Lion Search there that we use at Penn State. However, most of my schools have some form of different database for it. And remember, forensic sources, you want to, in the essay, and we're going to look at some examples of these, you want to have two of these paragraphs that break down the forensic source material. And then there's some examples here. The warrant, so the running theme of this presentation was the JFK assassination, sort of looking at that. Now, if you're in a class that we write the discourse community paper, the first paper, you could look at people who are more conspiracy theorists. You could look at a certain type of conspiracy, and then you could look at JFK assassination, and obviously the Warren report, which goes back to the 1960s. I want to say Pennsylvania's own Arlen Specter was on the Warren Commission. I want to say he also coined the term the single bullet theory, which is derisively referred to as the magic bullet theory. So forensic sources in the Warren Commission would be a really good example of primary source material that would be, it's in the past, it's forensic source material. And then another one that was about a little bit newer of a source material would be from 2007. It's going to be a chemical and forensic analysis of the JFK assassination, looking at the possibility of second shooter. And you can see academic source material. And what you would do in the paper is you would sort of break down and describe what the source material is trying to do. Okay. And then there's just some little bullet points for it. Okay, now the epideictic sources are going to be typically trying to promote a shared value and sort of consolidate the community, and it appeals to emotion. So if you think back to the ideas of Aristotle, he had ethos, pathos, and logos. This would be more on the pathos side, and it usually is going to be in a popular medium. However, that being said, sometimes with the speed of academic writing, there can be an epideictic source that is also an academic source. So, not necessarily, but I would think this is a time to get a little bit more of a popular-based source material in there. And it can be memes, websites, forums, videos, opinion articles. These are all going to be some things that you can bring in that you're trying to give a focus on a current type of source, and it's trying to build a sense of community, right? So if you compare the forensic source, which is trying to establish factual information, the epideictic source is trying to build a sense of community. It's trying to create a little bit of commonality with it. And the examples here were an opinion piece on Kennedy's legacy, and then also a documentary that is about JFK, remembering JFK. So it's one that's current, but it's trying to almost like give us a representation of what it was like, and maybe like a 40, 50-year retrospective on JF Kennedy's assassination. And then the last type of source, and remember, you want to have two of each one of the sources in the paragraphs, and look at the example essays, and we'll talk about them in a second. But the idea with the deliberative sources is they're making recommendations about the future, and they're almost giving a warning. They're trying to foreshadow, they're trying to make a prediction, and they're trying to make recommendations. Now, typically, these have maybe a legalistic type of feel to them. They can be government documents, it can be also opinion pieces or recommendations and guidelines, and also policies. But they're going to be action-oriented. They're going to usually build off of source material. So here's the thing. The deliberative sources, I want to say, is one of the keys to the thesis statement. It's a big part of the essay. What I would recommend is maybe to try to find whatever specific topic you're writing about, try to find sources that maybe offer two different solutions. So you have source A and a deliberative source, and then source B, another deliberative source. If they make two recommendations, you can really sort of juxtapose or sort of compare and contrast the way those source materials try to give a warning or try to give a recommendation for it. In addition, one of the better types of articles that you can find is going to be an article that has a link to other articles in it. So typically, if you found a article from Psychology Today, it's maybe making recommendations about usage. I know the other day I had somebody writing an article or an essay on microdosing, a very up and coming type of discussion in the academic world. They found a Psychology Today article that was making a pretty solid argument about its usage in therapeutic applications, so in the sort of therapy side. And what the student did was they found that the Psychology Today article linked to other studies, which actually highlighted the fact that we really don't have as much information on the actual microdosing. I want to say there was placebo effects, but what the source determined was we really don't have a declarative position on microdosing as of yet. This is in fall 2023 we're given this. So what the student mentioned was that there was a Psychology Today article. It made recommendations about the applications, and it was very pro that position. However, the source material that it was using, it was sort of neglecting to explain it. I thought, oh my gosh, this is really, really well done in terms of the paper. So deliberative sources, you want to have two. They're pretty critical. They're going to happen at the end of the essay, and they're sources that make recommendations. And in the example here, with John F. Kennedy assassination and some of the conspiracies around it, every year they've been teaching since like 2017, there's been certain time periods in the semester where the government has come out and said, oh, you know what, we're going to release some of the documents associated with the John F. Kennedy assassination. However, they typically end up being redacted, and therefore they're not released. So that's something you can look at as well. Okay, now this is a chart. What I'll do is I'll post this on Canvas. And typically, if I have a live class, I hand this out as well. But sort of breaks down the different types of source material, rhetorical modes, devices, appeals, examples, outcomes, intents. And it basically talks about the deliberative sources, epideictic sources, and then the forensic sources, and breaks down some of the things you can look at. It looks at the ways it's trying to present information. Now, I want to say this chart, which I didn't create this chart, but I took it from a website. I can't remember the exact website. The idea is you're sort of looking at like sources as literature review. Now, as you move forward in your academic career, if you're lucky enough that you want to get a PhD or maybe a master's degree, you're going to want to do something called a literature review. And you know what? You may even do this for like a senior type of project. You would go through and you would look at the source material associated or in the realm of your specific subject matter. So for example, a psychology student, if they were going to look at the impact of microdosing and they wanted to make a study on that, they would have to go and find X amount of articles that were from an academic peer-reviewed journal, and they would have to summarize the methodology or the conclusions or the hypothesis, the way the information was presented in those studies, and they'd have to relate it back and explain how they sort of utilize this. So where this assignment sort of comes out of is a sort of like lit review light, if that makes sense, and we want to really focus on what are some of those different types of moves, appeals, examples, outcomes, intent shifts that occur in the source material, and you're trying to analyze the source material and then trying to walk that back to your thesis statement. So this essay can be, it can be a little bit trickier for a student jumping into it. Now, for all my classes, the way they work is you write the essay, you make the changes at the end. Unless you're in my summer courses, which we have to write the whole thing, which can be a little bit tough. But remember, you're going to have some chances to make revisions for it. And typically in my classes, we do presentations where you look at the actual source material, you sort of explain what it's about, and hopefully by doing that process, you'll have a pretty good feel for it. What I'd recommend is you use this chart as almost points of analysis. You don't have to look at every single one of these because obviously it's a shorter, you're looking at a paragraph each for the sources, but it's a really good way of sort of jumping into the source material. Okay, now the next example we're going to look at is a paper I had from a student, wrote it maybe 1 year ago, maybe 2 years ago. Time flies, especially when you're having fun in the writing classes. And she wrote her paper on cults and looked at the People's Temple as her specific example. Now, cults are pretty fascinating. I was just listening to something the other day, a professor talking about his study of religious groups, and he was saying, in his opinion, cults don't exist, and that the brainwashing process is something that he's not a fan of using that terminology. Really fascinating discussion. I can't really speak to it right now, but I know that it was definitely like a hot take on cults and that sort of thing. Now, unfortunately, the Jim Jones cult, which was around, I want to say in the 1970s, came out of a time period where cult-type activity was, a lot of people say, at a really high rate. And it was sort of during the counterculture time period of the 60s and the 70s. So Jim Jones was a very specific preacher, and he had a cult that had, I want to say, the largest mass suicide in the United States. So a very tragic type of event. And what the student did was they created a forensic paragraph that looks specifically at the cult of the People's Temple, which is the name of the Jim Jones cult. And she specifically really did a really great job of looking at the idea that Jim Jones, as a cult leader, was really focused on minority groups. Now, what was occurring, and please, I'm not an expert in cult behavior, nor am I a historian, but from my baseline, basic understanding, the idea was that People's Temple was sort of an outlier at the time because it was a group that almost had leanings in, it was definitely a cult, but it was one of those churches that had a fair amount of diversity in terms of its membership. And from the students' perspective in the paper, it was an abuse of power of people of minority groups that Jim Jones was doing as almost like a quote unquote Caucasian savior, right? So that was sort of the theme of it. And what this student did, and what you'll want to look at in the example papers, is look at the way she analyzed the source material, very specifically mentioning the forensic source. You'll want to do that. Look at the examples of those. Put in the citation as well, and she explains the way the source material represents the information. And you can see here it had 75% African American, and she talks about that in the paper. And sorry for the view being just a little bit different. There's a PDF file, so I had to make two different options for it. But then she also breaks down and summarizes the source material. And this is another paragraph where she looks at a second type of forensic source. And really well done with this in terms of the article. So take a look at those online. And then I had another student that looked at this idea of food elitism. Now, I want to say her first paper was looking at vegans, which is a really good fit for this essay, although I have to say that it is probably the top paper I've had across the board in terms of the discourse community paper. So the student looked at food elitism, and it's sort of the idea that maybe there's some judgment going on when people decide on a certain lifestyle choice, and maybe they look down upon other people, and maybe because of economic reasons or other types of reasons that the other certain people can't afford to have a diet that is going to be quote unquote healthy, right? So there's the idea that they sort of are looking down upon them. And what the student did was they looked at epideictic sources for it, and they looked at a podcast. So you know, everybody's got a podcast these days. Oh my gosh, it's like an overwhelming thing, and so many people walk around going, heard on a podcast. In fact, I was almost going to say that a little bit earlier, but I didn't. So I digress for a second, but they basically explain the epideictic sources, which remember are going to be current source material. This was written in 2021, so a really good choice. They explain it, and they talk about the ethos of her argument, okay, and they break down the source material, and they talk about the target audience for it. So really, really well done in terms of the source material. So I'm going to put that example up as well, but just to give you a little bit of overview of what you want to do in the source material. You want to use that chart, and you want to analyze the source material and sort of explain what the source material is doing. Is it using ethos, pathos, and logos? Is it trying to establish you know, a connectivity with the audience? Think about who the audience for the piece is. Is it trying to establish, you know, some sort of continuity? Is it pro the position? Is it against the position? And really, if you can get some source material that's a little bit in between, you can be super successful with this. And if it has source material that links into it for the forensic, deliberative, epideictic sources, you're going to be super successful if you look at the original source and sort of look at the links for the paper as well. Okay, and another one on epideictic sources here. So I have another example of a paragraph. Once again, just make a note that it's going to mention that it is an epideictic source. Oh, really good usage of the dashes as well, which are in the quote. Okay, but you can look here, and I'm just sort of reading it, right? It mentions that it's going to be using sympathy, which is going to be pathos, and it also talks about how it uses strong images and language, and they describe very specific detail. Now, some of the information about you know, animal testing, obviously, or PETA can be, you know, super polarizing, and a lot of people have a very specific opinion about it, but the student is just trying to describe how the information is presented. And then there's a little bit more with the source material and explaining how the source material works, and then all the while going back up to the thesis statement. Okay, so you're going to use the information. Like we said, it's like a literature review light, trying to break down the source material. Take a look at some of the examples, but really good, well done in terms of like analyzing of source material. And I would say you want to mention what type of source it is. That's something that happens in the essay sometimes. Students will forget to mention the type of source it is. Make sure you tell me if it's an epideictic, forensic, or deliberative sources, and you want to have two of each. Okay, now lastly, it's going to be a group that a couple years ago, a student in my class wrote about UW girls, we girls, and basically it was a maybe a sort of a dying. I mean, I'm here in fall 2023, and maybe it was something that was maybe spiking in terms of like its popularity. Now at the time, a lot of the students in the class had heard of it. It was a big TikTok phenomenon, and it comes out of sort of, and I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, once again, as a caveat, but it comes out of sort of a gamer anime space, and the idea was that is it as a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon, is it fetishizing specifically Asian females, or is it cultural appropriation of other groups do it? And some really complicated discussions about this group happened in the class. Its student, her name was Tina, did a great job with the paper, and something that was really good fit for the essay as well. And what the student did, and you can look at this, is they basically read about this specific community, and they talked about the way the sort of background information with the source material, they connected it, and all the while said that, I want to say that the specific culture reinforced some negative stereotypes. And the thing was, I want to say her paper only had one academic source, and it was a real challenge to find that because it was sort of a newer phenomenon, right? If that makes sense. Now, this article made very specific recommendations about sort of the sugar daddy culture associated with this, and sort of the money making side of it, but also blending in with some statistical information, the fetishization, as I said, of Asian Americans or people from Japanese culture. Is this something that is cultural appropriation, or is it something that is a little bit more, is it a little bit more complex of a discussion? Really good job with the paper. And that's it. So that's I should have put an extra slide in there, but I hope that helps out. I want to keep this to 20 minutes. I got to 21, I got to 22 minutes. I'm gonna shut this down, but hopefully that helps. So please email if you got any questions about it, and we'll talk soon.